They moved through ordinary moments, familiar streets, quiet offices, open roads, making choices so small they barely registered, offering help, stepping outside, answering a call, going alone, agreeing to meet. Each moment felt safe, routine, unremarkable. Yet beneath the calm, something shifted, unnoticed, as normal life slowly gave way to uncertainty. Let's uncover one small decision. Then they vanished forever. 5 true cases. Story 1. It was a quiet Wednesday night in Orange County, California. Routine, familiar, and unremarkable. A workplace meeting had just ended. A hospital visit followed. And then, in the glow of parking lot lights, a car appeared, accelerated, and vanished into the dark. Dorothy Jane Scott was never seen again. Dorothy Jane Scott was 32 years old, a single mother living in Stanton, California, with her young son, whom she adored. She worked as a secretary for 2 jointly owned Anaheim businesses and was known as dependable, gentle, and deeply devoted to her family and faith. Dorothy didn't go out much. She didn't party. She preferred evenings at home, church on Sundays, and time with her child. Friends and co-workers described her as cautious and reserved, but also kind. She was the person who noticed when someone didn't look well, the person who stayed late to help, the person who offered rides, favors, and reassurance. In the months before her disappearance, however, Dorothy had been living with quiet fear. An unknown man had been calling her repeatedly, sometimes professing love, sometimes making violent threats. He knew details about her life. Once, a single dead rose was left on her car. Dorothy began taking karate lessons and talked about buying a gun. She believed someone was watching her. On the evening of May 28, 1980, Dorothy attended a work meeting in Anaheim. She noticed a coworker, Conrad Bostrom, looked ill and had a swollen mark on his arm. Dorothy offered to drive Conrad and another coworker, Pam Head, to the hospital. It was meant to be quick, helpful, ordinary. They stopped briefly at Dorothy's parents' home so she could check on her son. At the hospital, Conrad was treated for a black widow spider bite. Around 11 p.m. he was discharged. Dorothy offered to retrieve her car so he wouldn't have to walk far. She went alone to the parking lot. Minutes later, Pam and Conrad saw Dorothy's white Toyota speeding toward them. The headlights were so bright that they couldn't see the driver. They waved, but the car didn't slow. It swerved sharply and disappeared. At first, they assumed Dorothy had been called away for an emergency involving her son. Hours passed. No call, no return. Dorothy was reported missing. By early morning, her car was found burning in an alley 10 miles away. Dorothy was gone. Police quickly learned about the threatening phone calls. Then, something chilling happened. A man began calling Dorothy's family, saying, "I have her," or "I killed her." He also called a local newspaper and claimed responsibility for her murder. What made the calls disturbing was not just the confession, but the details. The caller knew about the spider bite. He knew Dorothy had changed scarves that night. Details never released publicly. Investigators believe the caller was responsible. On August 6, 1984, partial remains were found in the Santa Ana Canyon area. A turquoise ring and watch were also found. Dorothy's mother said that the watch stopped at 12:30 a.m. on May 29th. This was about an hour after Head and Bostrom last saw Dorothy's vehicle. On August 14th, the bones were confirmed belonged to Dorothy through dental records. The cause of death could not be determined. No arrests were ever made. Dorothy's memorial service was held on August 22nd. Dorothy's parents lived with unanswered questions for the rest of their lives. They kept their phone line open, hoping, against reason, that their daughter might call. Instead, the calls continued. Her son grew up without her. Friends were left haunted by the moment they watched her car disappear, believing, just briefly, that everything was fine. What if Dorothy hadn't offered to help that night? What if the danger she sensed had already been waiting? Story 2. Marske by the Sea was quiet in late December, the kind of seaside town where winter afternoons blurred gently into dusk. The promenade was familiar, the route was routine. A short walk by the water felt harmless. Until one moment broke the rhythm, and Stephen Clark simply disappeared. Stephen Clark was 23 years old, living with his parents in the North Yorkshire village of Marske by the Sea. He was tall, soft-spoken, and known for his dry sense of humor and kind nature. As a child, Stephen survived a devastating road accident that left him with permanent physical disabilities, limited use of his left arm, and a pronounced limp. Despite this, Stephen worked hard to build an independent life. He was employed at Marske Hall, part of the Leonard Cheshire organization, and attended the Rathbone Society in Redcar, which supported people with disabilities. Shortly before his disappearance, Stephen had been named Apprentice of the Year, a recognition his family was deeply proud of. Stephen loved music, computers, and swimming. He was an Arsenal fan, close to his younger sister, and deeply connected to his parents. Those who knew him described him as reliable and routine-oriented, someone unlikely to vanish without explanation. On the afternoon of December 28, 1992, Stephen went for a walk with his mother along the seafront at Saltburn by the Sea. It was just after 3 p.m., daylight still lingering. The two strolled along the promenade, a familiar route they had taken many times before. Near the pier, Stephen entered the men's public toilets, while his mother went into the adjacent women's facility. It was meant to take only a minute. When she came out, Stephen wasn't there. She waited. She looked around. She did not see him leave the building. Assuming he had decided to walk home on his own, a short, familiar journey, she headed back to Marske. Stephen never arrived. When hours passed without contact, the family reported him missing. Searches began quickly, but no trace of Stephen was found at the toilets or along the seafront. There was no sign of a struggle, no belongings left behind, no confirmed witnesses who saw him leave the area. In the days and weeks that followed, several unconfirmed sightings were reported. One woman believed she saw Stephen walking through Marske later that afternoon. Another man thought he recognized Stephen in Redcar 2 days later, noting a familiar limp, but admitted he hadn't seen the man's face clearly. Weeks later, a woman reported seeing Stephen in Saltburn, accompanied by an older man. None of these sightings could be verified. For years, the case remained unresolved. Then, in 1999, police received an anonymous letter claiming Stephen was dead and naming someone responsible. Still, no charges followed. In 2020, nearly 3 decades later, a cold case review concluded that Stephen had likely come to serious harm. A murder investigation was opened. His parents were arrested, their home searched, and the case thrust back into public view. Months later, police announced there would be no further action. The arrests were dropped. No explanation was offered for what happened to Stephen. Stephen's family has lived with what they describe as ambiguous loss, the pain of not knowing whether to grieve or hope. His sister has spoken openly about the devastation, saying the family stopped celebrating Christmas for years because it felt wrong without him. They continue to believe Stephen would never have chosen to disappear. They still want answers, any answers. What if Stephen had waited outside instead of stepping inside alone? What if a familiar routine wasn't as safe as it seemed? Story 3. The Wind River Range stretched wide and quiet beneath a Wyoming sky, a place where solitude felt natural and movement felt free. On a summer afternoon, the roads were empty, the trails familiar, and the mountains unchanged. It was the kind of place where a routine run felt safe, until one ordinary decision marked the moment Amy Wroe Bechtel was never seen again. Amy Joy Wroe Bechtel was 24 years old when she disappeared. Born in California and raised largely in Wyoming, Amy was the youngest of 4 siblings and known for her discipline, warmth, and quiet intensity. She was an elite distance runner at the University of Wyoming, setting records and dreaming of qualifying for the 2000 Summer Olympics. Running wasn't just a sport for Amy, it was her identity. Friends described her as focused and optimistic, someone who planned carefully and followed through. She loved the outdoors and found peace in Wyoming's open spaces. In college, Amy met Steve Bechtel, a well-known rock climber. The two married in 1996 and settled in Lander, Wyoming, drawn by the rugged terrain that supported both of their athletic passions. By the summer of 1997, Amy was teaching fitness classes, organizing a local 10-kilometer race, and building a future rooted in movement and ambition. On July 24, 1997, Amy spent the morning teaching a fitness class and running errands around town. She stopped at a photography shop to ask about a competition and worked on plans for the upcoming race she was organizing. Later that afternoon, Amy drove toward the Loop Road near Sinks Canyon State Park, a route she knew well. She intended to run part of the course for the race she was planning, a training run in terrain she had navigated many times before. Amy parked her white Toyota Tercel near Burnt Gulch and set out on foot. She did not tell anyone exactly when she would return. That evening, Steve came home around 4:30 p.m. Amy wasn't there. At first, it didn't feel alarming. Amy often ran long distances. As the hours passed and darkness fell, concern grew. By 1 a.m., friends searching the area found Amy's car parked along the road, unlocked, undamaged, and empty. Amy was nowhere nearby. An extensive search began within hours. Law enforcement, volunteers, friends, and family combed the area. Trails, rivers, ravines, abandoned mines. Hundreds of people searched for days, then weeks. Not a single footprint, article of clothing, or confirmed trace of Amy was found. Early theories focused on environmental dangers, a fall, wildlife, and exposure. But as days turned into weeks, investigators began to suspect foul play. Attention turned to Steve after journals he had written were discovered to contain violent imagery. Steve stated the writings were song lyrics and denied any connection to Amy's disappearance. His alibi, that he was rock climbing with friends, was corroborated. He declined a polygraph on legal advice. Over the years, other theories emerged. Convicted murderer Dale Wayne Eaton became a person of interest after evidence placed him in Wyoming during the same period. Eaton has never spoken about Amy's case. Despite tips, satellite imagery, recovered items including a watch similar to Amy's, and renewed investigative efforts, no definitive answers followed. In 2004, Amy was declared legally dead. Her disappearance remains unsolved. Amy's family has spent decades living between hope and grief. They continue to push for renewed searches and investigations, believing answers still exist. For them, Amy is not a mystery. She is a sister, a daughter, and an athlete whose life was interrupted, not concluded. What if Amy had told someone exactly where she planned to run that day? What if a familiar path was not as safe as it seemed? Story 4. It was a quiet summer morning in southern New Jersey, the kind where routines felt safe and familiar. Buses ran on time. Streets were busy but ordinary. For a teenage girl eager to prove her independence, the day felt full of promise. One phone call, one meeting, and a short trip into town. Nothing about it suggested danger. Then, Margaret Ellen Fox vanished. Margaret Ellen Maggie Fox was 14 years old when she disappeared. Born on February 4th, 1960, she lived in Burlington, New Jersey with her family. Maggie was described as responsible, gentle, and eager to help others. She loved piano lessons, enjoyed horseback riding, and had recently graduated from St. Paul's Grammar School, an important milestone she reached just weeks before she vanished. Like many teenagers, Maggie wanted to earn her own money. Babysitting was common, familiar, and considered safe. Her parents trusted her judgment. She was known to leave notes, follow instructions, and check in when plans changed. Nothing about Maggie's personality suggested risk-taking or rebellion. In June 1974, Maggie placed an advertisement offering babysitting services. Shortly after, she received a call from a man who identified himself as John Marshall. He claimed to be looking for a babysitter for his young son. Marshall postponed meeting Maggie several times, then finally said he would meet her in Mount Holly, New Jersey. He told her he would arrive in a red Volkswagen. He gave her a phone number so she could reach him. On the morning of June 24th, 1974, Maggie left her home after writing a note explaining where she was going. Her younger sibling walked her to the bus stop and watched her board the bus at approximately 8:40 a.m. Witnesses later reported seeing her near Mill and High Streets after she arrived in Mount Holly. She never returned home. Maggie has not been seen or heard from since that morning. When Maggie failed to come home, her family contacted authorities. Almost immediately, investigators recognized troubling signs. The phone number John Marshall had provided was traced to a public phone booth at a supermarket in Lumberton, New Jersey. Within hours of Maggie being reported missing, police began recording calls to the Fox household. One call stood out. A man demanded a $10,000 ransom and told Maggie's mother, $10,000 might be a lot of bread, but your daughter's life is the buttered topping. The caller was never identified, but investigators believe the call was genuine and connected to Maggie's disappearance. As the investigation continued, other parents in the area reported men attempting to lure young girls with fake job offers. In 1976, one individual falsely confessed to involvement in Maggie's disappearance. The confession was later proven to be a hoax. John Marshall has never been identified. Decades later, the case remains open. In recent years, the FBI and Burlington City Police have renewed efforts, releasing the ransom call audio publicly in hopes that someone might recognize the voice. A reward remains active, and retired investigators continue reviewing old leads. Maggie's parents are now deceased, having lived the rest of their lives without answers. Her siblings remain hopeful that the truth will one day come to light. For them, the passage of time has not softened the loss, only deepened the questions. Maggie was a daughter, a sister, and a young girl whose future was never given the chance to unfold. What if that phone call had never been answered? What if a short meeting had never been agreed to? Story 5. It was an ordinary weekday morning in a small Toledo office park, the kind of place where doors stayed locked, routines were predictable, and nothing unusual ever seemed to happen. Inside one quiet law office, a young woman was doing what she did every morning, answering phones, organizing files, and waiting for the day to begin. Then a phone call came in. Shortly after, Cynthia Anderson vanished. Cynthia Jane Cindy Anderson was 20 years old. Born on February 4th, 1961, she was raised in a strict religious household and described by her family as gentle, obedient, and deeply faithful. Cindy worked as a legal secretary in Toledo, Ohio, a job she performed reliably and seriously. She had a boyfriend and plans for the future. In just 2 weeks, she intended to quit her job and attend Bible college with him. According to her family, she had no history of running away, substance use, or rebellion. Cindy was close to her parents and siblings and had a strong social circle within her church community. In the year before her disappearance, Cindy confided something troubling to her family. She had been experiencing recurring, violent nightmares. In them, someone she trusted, let inside, would ultimately betray her. At the time, her family believed the dreams reflected anxiety rather than danger. On the morning of August 4th, 1981, Cindy arrived at work as usual. She was often alone in the office during the mornings, so she kept the door locked at all times. A buzzer had been installed at her desk, so she could alert the business next door if she needed help. Sometime after 10 a.m., phone calls to the office went unanswered. At noon, 2 attorneys returned from a meeting and found the office locked, lights on, radio playing, and mail still in the door. Cindy was gone. Her purse and car keys were missing, but her car was still parked outside. There were no signs of a struggle. On her desk lay a romance novel, open to the only violent scene in the book, a passage describing an abduction at knife point. Cindy was never seen again. Police immediately began searching for clues. There was no forced entry and no evidence of violence. Cindy's bank account was never touched. Her social security number has never been used. A client later told police that the day before Cindy vanished, she received a phone call at work that visibly frightened her. He described her expression as genuinely terrified and said he contacted police afterward to request a drive-by check on her safety. In September 1981, police received a chilling anonymous call from a woman whispering that Cindy was being held in the basement of a white house. She mentioned 2 similar houses side by side, owned by the same family, and said their son was responsible. Before providing an address, the caller hung up. Despite canvassing neighborhoods, investigators never identified the location or confirmed the call's legitimacy. Years later, attention turned to Cindy's workplace. In 1995, a federal grand jury indicted several individuals connected to a drug trafficking ring in Toledo. One informant claimed that a man involved had confessed to killing Cindy to send a message related to legal representation. The confession could not be verified, and no charges were filed in Cindy's case. To this day, investigators believe foul play is likely, but no single theory has been proven. Cindy's family has never stopped hoping for answers. Her parents passed away without knowing what happened to their daughter. Her siblings continue to speak about her as someone who would never have left willingly. For them, the unanswered questions remain as heavy now as they were in 1981. What if that phone call had gone unanswered? What if Cindy had never stepped away from her desk? Each of these stories began the same way, without fear, without warning, and without any sense that a line had just been crossed. A short walk, a quick favor, a familiar run, a phone call was answered, a moment that felt too small to matter. But for 5 people, those ordinary decisions became the last known steps of their lives. No final goodbyes, no clear endings. Only silence, questions, and families left waiting for answers that never came. These cases remind us how thin the line can be between routine and disappearance, and how quickly someone can be lost without ever intending to leave. This is Vanished Stories, where the missing are never forgotten.